Hi there. On today's video of the day, we'll be talking to James Tanner from Bryston. Bryston's a manufacturer of a whole broad range of equipment from amplifiers to power amps, preamps, transformers and turntables, digital players, DACs, DAPs, optical transports. Pretty much everything you can think of, Bryston makes and puts together in their systems, or you can buy them individually. So let's go in and have a look. So I'm sitting here with James Tanner, and perhaps, James, you could just introduce yourself, your role at Bryston, and give us a short history of the company and sort of how it got started and how it got to where it is now.
Sure, yeah, I'm James Tanner, and anyway, I was basically vice president of Bryston, and I used to do most of the marketing. So the history of the company is originally it started back in 1962, actually, and it was a manufacturer of blood analyzers in Canada. And in 1968, a gentleman...
Are we in Peterborough? Is it you?
We're in Peterborough now, yeah. And in 1968, a gentleman by the name of John Russell, who was a U.S. NASA engineer, moved to Canada and bought the company. And I met his sons in the late 70s, and the company at that point was strictly doing these blood analyzers, but very high-tech stuff, like 1% tolerance parts, that kind of thing. So we decided, I'm dating myself, but the products in those days were things like Dynacos, and you do a lot of kits and stuff. So we decided we would put an amplifier together. So we ended up building the first amplifier, which was called a Pro 3, and it was a 100 watt per channel stereo amplifier. And there was a recording studio in Toronto that was having a shootout of all the top amplifiers of that day.
What studio was it?
Eastern Sound. Okay. And so we took the amplifier down, and lo and behold, they decided it was the best of the group of 10. So I went back to John Russell, the owner, and said, can we take a little corner of the company and build some amps? They ordered 10. And that's how the whole thing started. Wow. And within about 3 years, we had shifted totally to, but because we had all this high-tech stuff, it was interesting because the amplifier of that time would be, let's say, plus or minus 10% parts. We were like plus or minus 1% parts. So, and things like dual power supplies instead of a single power supply, one for each channel, those were all sort of philosophies that we had at the time.
Wow. And I mean, and considering the time, I mean, that was fairly progressive thinking, because I mean, those, most people were still dealing with a mono.
Very much so, yeah. Or adding big capacitor banks to, provide instantaneous. But we had the idea that, give each channel its own power supply, and things would be better. Yeah.
And that's become, like these days, that's what everybody's doing now. Is
exactly.
Having, mono blocks. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, in fact, was your speaker design, both this stacked pair where you have the larger speakers on the top and bottom and moving progressively slower or into smaller tweeters by the center, and also this concept of active speakers versus passive. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Yeah, we started the speaker thing about 5 years ago, and it's actually a pretty interesting story because I really wasn't thinking in terms of getting into the speaker business, because there's a lot of good speakers out there. But a friend of mine owns a speaker company very close to where Bryston is in Peterborough. And I've been thinking about building a reference loudspeaker so that we could evaluate our own gear. So I went to him and said, I'd like to build an active speaker. And by active speaker, I mean that an amplifier drives each driver and each loudspeaker independently. There's no passive networks, no capacitors, no inductors, that kind of thing. So you get a much purer sound. And most recording studios, as you know, obviously use that purpose. They'll use that active systems. Anyway, long story short, he built me a pair of speakers. Went through about 5 different versions. I had them in the house. Some of our dealers would come over, some of our distributors, and they would listen to them and say, James, why don't you think about offering these on the market? And long story short, we ended up in the speaker business. That's kind of how it evolved. Now, the active thing came as a result of, I think as audiophiles, the problem we have is that we tend to do a lot of sideway moves. So, let's try this amp, let's try this preamp, let's try this turntable, let's try this wire, whatever. And stepping into an active system legitimately takes you to that next level. There's a real reason to go there. So that was the concept of active, is this is a state-of-the-art statement. And that's really the way to get there. The stack pair, and I'm, give you some history, was back in the 70s, there was a speaker called Advent, and the common thing was to take 2 pair and stack one on top of the other. The bottom line is you got to move air, and you got to move it at very low distortion. And the ability of a stacked pair is that you move the air with much lower distortion because you have that many more drivers to work with. Number 2, if you think about looking at this speaker as an example, you have woofers top and bottom. Most rooms, the problems they have are what they call standing waves. So they're pressurizing the room, but you have these huge dips and peaks in the frequency response in the room due to the fact that you've got a woofer near the floor, let's say, energizing the room. When you place them top and bottom like that, it actually neutralizes to a very large degree that bass problem. Right. So the advantage is twofold. Turn them upside down, use the same speaker, get much more sound pressure level at much lower distortion, and you actually end up with less issues in terms of room modes.
Wow.
So there is, I guess one of the points I'd like to make is that the company has always been about science. Mm-hmm. It's always been about the physics of things. It's not been about, what's popular today and that kind of thing. We've always designed and built based on that premise.
But then there's also the issue of the music and what is your objective when you're trying to take something that's sent to you? What is your sort of objective with Bryston? Are you looking to provide a very flat, neutral environment that reproduces what it's given, or do you introduce anything?
Absolutely, and I think in terms of the accuracy of it, and if you don't mind, I'll tell you a quick story. When Jack Renner from Telok Recordings used to come to Eastern Sound all the time, he would always call me up at Bryston and say, "Hey James, can you bring down some speakers and amps? We're going to do a setup." And one time I was there, Oscar Peterson and a guitar player named Lauren Olofsky was there.
Oh, I know Lauren, yeah.
And Lauren came in with this beat up old tube speaker amplifier thing and sat it down and said to him, "Can you mic this for me?" And I went up to him and I said, "What was the reason for that?" And he said, "I want that sound mic'd." So if you think about it, our job is to reproduce that.
Yeah.
So I don't want to add anything to that, no artifacts.
Yeah.
So our whole thing is linearity. Like how do we lower the known distortions as best we can?
Yeah.
And over the years, that's what's happened. Lower noise floors, like we're approaching 120 dB noise floors now.
Wow.
Where back in the day, you were lucky if you could get 80 or 90, right?
Wow, yeah.
So that's where things have really improved in terms of being able to listen into.
You, in the system that we're going to be sampling in a few minutes, there is no transport player, or at least no CD or phono. Basically it's all either network driven, or I guess we're going to plug in USB stuff. Yeah. Is that becoming increasingly common to sell without transport of any kind?
Yeah. People are moving towards digital music in a variety of ways, but basically in this case, we have a product called a BDP, which is basically a computer designed to do one thing and one thing only, play music.
Yeah.
So the concept is that you can, get better performance than just picking up your local Mac or whatever and plugging it in.
Yeah, of course.
Because you never know what's going on in the background. That's the problem with the software, right? Yeah. So yes, and to answer to your question, there is a resurgence in analog and turntables. We sell a turntable, as a matter of fact. But it's the majority of the people are moving towards digital products and digital interfacing with those products through their iPhones, iPads, that kind of thing.
Yeah. For me, it's interesting because I still have a love of hard media, whether it's CD or vinyl, but I also have a lot of high resolution music. Just digitally.
Right.
But also, I've gotten into some of the many high resolution formats, but they're becoming increasingly difficult to find in terms of players that'll play them.
Absolutely.
Opera went out is not doing it anymore.
Yep. Yeah.
So
and that was DVD essentially, like they were.
Yeah, but they played SACD,
and SACDs as well. Yeah.
And they played.
But once the people started streaming movies, that was sort of the killer for that particular machine.
It seemed to me that was their, they just said, we're not going to be able to market anymore.
It's not worth it anymore.
And it's, it's a sad time. But the thing is that, the network players that are around now are much more sophisticated than they were even 5 or 10 years ago.
Correct.
Okay, what you're going to hear is a Knowledge About Jazz exclusive. We're going to be playing a tune from Epistrophe, The new album by guitarist Bill Frisell and double bassist Thomas Morgan, released on ECM Records on April 12th. It follows Small Town from 2017, and it's another recording from their live show at the Village Vanguard in the spring of 2016. This is John Barry's theme from the James Bond film You Only Live Twice, and I think you'll hear something special. For tomorrow's video of the day, we'll be looking at AudioFi, an initiative started by the festival which focuses on women in the industry.